Isn't this just the ultimate summer painting? Just imagine after a warm summer's day, a young woman has laid down on the couch and has fallen asleep, while behind her the sun goes down. Hi, welcome to Stories of Art. My name is Carel Huydecoper, and today I would like to tell you the story of this spectacular painting called Flaming June. But before I start, I've noticed that most of you have not yet subscribed to my channel, so this would be a good moment to remind you that you can, and it's free. And if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe, which is also free. And it takes only one click on the button just below here, and then a click on the bell icon next to it, because only if you do that, you'll be notified when I post new videos. And if you really want to help my channel, please consider sharing my videos with whomever might be interested. And now back to Flaming June. It was painted by Sir Frederic Leighton in 1895. And it's by many considered to be his finest work, his magnum opus, the sort of culmination of many years of experience, as it is thought to be the last painting he ever completed. And it's truly a daring painting, with this woman sleeping in this bright orange dress as its only subject. But let me start by telling you something about the artist, Frederic Leighton, or Sir Frederic Leighton from 1878 onwards. He was born in 1830, went to university in England and travelled extensively through Europe. And there he was trained in the arts by various different people. He mostly painted, but made some sculptures and designed a few monuments, mostly a couple of tombs here and there. But it's painting that he's remembered for, even though I have to say that for a long time he was barely remembered at all, because his kind of academic painting fell out of favour during much of the 20th century. And he was only rediscovered in the 1960s by some, and in the 90s and 2000s by larger audiences. And that's not just him. The entire Victorian age was unfashionable for a long time. But in his own day, he was very, very successful. He was an associate of the Royal Academy, he was its president for 18 years, and he was knighted for being this excellent painter, well, in 1878. And he even received a peerage in January of 1896. He was made a baron, which was to be an hereditary title, but unfortunately he died the next day, and since he didn't have any children, he holds the record for the shortest peerage in British history. He apparently was also an enthusiastic volunteer soldier. He served throughout his adult life in the so-called Artist Rifles, a corps that, through all the strange machinations of history, still exists today. And if I'm not terribly mistaken, it's now called 21 SAS. But Leighton was amongst the very first group to join and eventually became its commanding officer. And at some point, the painter James McNeill Whistler, who always liked to tease people, said about Leighton that he was the colonel of the Royal Academy, the president of the Artist Rifles, and he paints a little. And if we look at his house, we can see that at least financially he did very well, because he built his own house on 12 Holland Park Road. I say this address so freely because it's now a museum, and actually quite an interesting place to visit if you ever find yourself in London. The whole place was designed and built to live in, but more importantly to display art and to produce it in his studio. Early in his career he was very much interested in the Pre-Raphaelites. Now these Pre-Raphaelites had been interested mostly in a revival of medieval culture, and they loved to tell Arthurian legends and so on. But at some point Leighton stepped away from that, and he became much more focused on ancient Greek influences. And in this painting we can see those elements quite clearly. His later works can mostly be seen as part of the aesthetic movement, or aestheticism. That is a movement in art, not just visual art, but also in literature and music and so on, that focused on beauty without any sort of morals. Just the idea was to make beautiful things without bothering with, social, political issues. And these aesthetics were amongst those art movements that hailed the saying l'art pour l'art, or art for art's sake. But they were by no means the only group that used that saying. But that is why so much of his work does not tell a particular story. That is, it doesn't tell the great moral stories of mythology, medieval literature, or the Bible, or whatever. Often there seems to be no moral message at all that is conveyed to us. It's simply a beautiful picture. And that is where we find ourselves here, with this woman who has fallen asleep on a couch of some kind. We see the sun setting behind her with this warm golden light that comes over the picture. It looks like it's the end of the day rather than sunrise. mainly through the golden hue of the sunlight, but also because she has some color on her cheeks. So she either had a bit of sun today, or she's blushing slightly. Her dress, it's just a little bit transparent. You can see through it a bit, and just enough to make it a little bit erotic, but very far from pornographic. Her surroundings tell us something about where she is. Just look at the marble architecture around her. That gives us a hint that this is set in Greece, possibly ancient Greece. Also, the sea, the sun, and the island in the distance, they all help to give us the impression that this is somewhere in the Mediterranean. Now, Leighton made a lot of these women in sort of general Mediterranean surroundings in somewhat Greek-inspired dress, like this one, which is in the Milwaukee Art Museum, and it's usually called Lady at the Fountain. Here too we think of Greece or the Mediterranean because of the marble and her dress, and I guess the lemons help as well. But the dress is clearly inspired by Greek sculpture, like this one. This is Niké, goddess of victory. Her role usually is she decides the outcome of a battle. She does that by touching the battlefield with her bare foot. And here we see her taking off her sandal to prepare for just that. And I guess that shoe company didn't think of that particular detail when they came up with their name. But this lady could almost be wearing the same dress as our Flaming June, except that the color is more subdued here. But he also made a lot of sleeping women, or women reclining or just lounging, like one of his other very famous paintings, the Garden of the Hesperides. It is this garden mentioned in mythology, in fact in the stories of Hercules, and at some point he has to get golden apples from the tree at the center of the garden of the Hesperides. The tree itself is guarded by a monster that can only be controlled by the sisters. So that's what we see here. 3 women lounging around a tree with golden apples, and this huge snake that is slithering in between them and around them. But it's actually a theme in art, especially of the Victorian age, to see women asleep or relaxing as a subject for a painting, often based on the idea of nymphs from mythology that are sleeping somewhere. But in this case there's no hint given that this is about any sort of mythological figure. She's just in this Mediterranean setting and with a Greek-style dress. It has been suggested that for her pose, Leighton was inspired by Michelangelo, and in particular this sculpture of Night, which is part of the funerary monument for Giuliano de' Medici, and you can find it in the new sacristy of the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence. And I can see that perhaps that could be true. She has a similar pulled up leg, but it's also clear that there are many differences, so maybe not. Luckily, we still have some of the sketches for the painting, and from it we can deduce that he had some trouble deciding over her exact pose. There's also this sketch, a study for the painting, where he made a difference in the awning above her. Here you can see that he tried to add a bit of a breeze to the painting, but in the final work he decided against it. So there's only an awning for shade that we can just make out at the top of the painting. By the way, we have a pretty good idea of who his model was, because at the time, in the 1890s, Leighton had a favorite model. Her name was Dorothy Dene, and we actually have a couple of photographs of her. Now, if you look at them, this could very well be the lady that we see in Flaming June. Now, many have pointed out that there's a plant next to her, and it's a recognizable plant. It's called oleander, and apparently it's poisonous. And this has led some people to say that that plant symbolizes death, and the whole painting therefore is about a relationship between sleep and death. Now, I'm reluctant to agree. If you find something in a painting that doesn't belong there, or it's something strange or unnatural, then it's easy to see it as a symbol for something. But if something is just a regular plant that is common to the Mediterranean and often kept as a houseplant, I really don't see the significance of the fact that it's poisonous. I mean, it's not as if she's about to take a bite from it. So I doubt that there's much symbolism in this painting at all. It is just what we see, a woman after a warm day taking a nap in the shade. Either that, or it's a Dutch football fan after the national team has played. Now, the idea was that this painting was to be part of a series of paintings that would be sent to the Paris exhibition of 1900. Leighton had already made a selection of paintings by 1895 to be sent there. And we know this because there's a preliminary set out and photographed in his studio. And there you can see Flaming June amongst the pictures. However, it was first either sold or lent to a magazine called The Graphic. They wanted to make a reproduction and then print that on their Christmas issue, which happened in 1895. But in January of 1896, Leighton suddenly died. His funeral procession was to pass by their shop, and they put the painting in the window for people to see it. After that, it was seen in several museums. It was at least lent to the Ashmolean, and it was sent to Paris for the Paris exhibition in 1900. But after that, we lose track of it. And it was only rediscovered in 1960. And there's a story about an early admirer of it in 1960, because that was Andrew Lloyd Webber, or so the story goes. Apparently he saw it in the window of an art gallery, and it was for sale for £50. Now, £50 was a lot more money then than it is today, but it's still an insultingly low price for a painting. And he didn't have the money, so he wanted to borrow it from his grandmother, but his grandmother refused to do that, and she said, and I quote, "I don't want to have any Victorian junk in my flat." And that's why he missed the opportunity to buy it. A few years later, in 63, it showed up at auction in Amsterdam, where it failed to meet the minimal price. But there just happened to be a wealthy businessman from Puerto Rico in Amsterdam at the time, named Louis Ferré. And he had just opened a new museum in Puerto Rico called Museo de Arte de Ponce. And he was in Amsterdam with the purpose of buying art for the museum. And he saw it and he snatched it up for apparently only $140, which in today's money would constitute maybe $1,100 or so dollars, but it's still an incredible price. And that's how this wonderful painting ended up in Puerto Rico, where you can still see it today. It has become their most prominent painting, and all we have to do to see it is, well, take a trip there. Now, before you do that, don't forget to give me a like on this video, and if for some odd reason you haven't yet subscribed, this is the moment to do it. And when you do that, don't forget to also hit that bell icon. Anyway, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and see you again next time. Bye.